Are you using the WordPress block editor? Well, when you do, sometimes you find there's a bit of a gap in what you want to do. And I found a recent one of those when it came to listing categories. I wanted to list a custom category in a sidebar to work a bit like a filter, kind of like this. And you can see here that with this filter, I've got a nested set of categories. It's a custom taxonomy or custom post type, and it's got a count in the side of it. And there wasn't a block for this, but there was a PHP function within WordPress for it. So I created a custom block, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to use that custom block, and then we're going to dig through some of the code and about how I actually created this and made it available on Gist for everyone else to use. So let's jump on in. I'll show you how this works and how we built this code. Okay, so here we've got the sidebar, and this equipment categories area over here is what we're referring to. This is currently managed as a widget area, and the equipment categories are a custom taxonomy. So if we go into the back end of my website, you'll notice that underneath equipment, we have equipment types. And this is just all the different types of equipment we have. You've got a count and that kind of thing. So what I want to be able to do is list these with their relevant nesting. To do that, I've turned on a sidebar. I'm using Cadence in this case, but you could be using anything. And if we go to the widget area, you'll notice that under sidebar 2, I've got this thing called equipment categories with WP list category block. And that's all this shows. It doesn't show anything else. I've just done that to reduce background kind of processing while I created the block. And over in the sidebar, we have the category list settings. And this drop down here shows you the different types of taxonomy types that are available. So, you've got like nav menus and things like that, job locations and things from other custom post types that we have within this website. Next, I have the depth of list. Now, by default, this is 0. But if we just jump over to WP list categories function, this is the function we're using to generate our list. And inside of here, the depth there tells you what it is. It's got the current, the category depth used for tab indentation. So that's something that I put as a value. Next one, echo. Well, I didn't need to use the echo because echo means, do you want it to output code or not? Well, this is a block, so you're always going to want it to do that. Exclude, I didn't bother with the exclude or the exclude tree, feed image, feed type, none of that. Hide title if empty is in there. Separator I've left. Show count is in there. The show option alls are not there. Style I also left out. Taxonomy, of course, is there. That's the selector you've just seen. Title LI is there. So if we look here, we'll see that you have title LI, and that's exactly the same thing. So these values, hide title if empty, all these are the same. Now this show debugging QM, if I turn that on, what it does is just shows the parameters that are being sent through to my dynamic block, and it shows them to me inside Query Monitor. So I can go up to Query Monitor and look at logs, and it will show it up there. Okay, so that's what that does. So this block can be used anywhere. So if I click on plus here and we scroll down, we'll see that we've got the block with the little smiley face on it, and it's called WP list categories. That's what we've created in this code. And by sticking that in there, I can get a list of any categories that I like from any category type, and it will output them on the page in the section that I like. In this case, we're using it as a sidebar for a custom post type, and it's working quite well in terms of being like a filter, almost like a facet really, for this particular website. So I can go over to that equipment hire area and see all the different information, which is fantastic. So that's how the block works. Now, when we start looking at the code, you can go over to GitHub, to MRKWP, and I'll put this link down below inside our description. And you can take a look at the code here. Now, the code is relatively simple. There's a number of different files that are just kind of boilerplate stuff. So we'll glance over those first and take a quick look at them. So first of all, we've got our git ignore. That just ignores things that I don't want pushed into git. Okay. License. Well, this was my initial commit. I've just put an MIT license on this. Next, we've got the README file, and that's the text just down here describing what the file is. Package lock and package.json are both related to our node libraries. So if you download this, you have to run an npm install, and it will install everything so you can compile the block yourself. So that's the same as using create Guten block or anything like that, and you can see all the information there where we've got all of that. And I do realize I've got a GPL license there and a license here of MIT, but hey, I made this today and just wanted to get it out there for everyone to see. Next, we've got this little files thing here. This is so that plugin zip just zips what I want. I often do that when I've compiled a bit of code and I want to zip it and be able to install it over the top to be able to test it. So it means that I can have a test environment and I create a zip and keep installing over the top and changing my version numbers. It just makes it easy to deal with kind of a default install instead of having a CD out and JIT pull all the time. The other thing as well that does is it means that I can make a package without SFTPing and sometimes accidentally sending huge node folders up onto my server, which nobody wants to do. And hey, we make those mistakes. So I just put that in there because it's nice and simple. And all that's saying really is, compress up the WP list categories in the build folder. All right. So from there, we've now got where really the magic happens, and that's with the registration of the block. So every block has to have a registration. And this here is really just registering my build folder up here. And it's basically just saying, register this block. So on initialization of WordPress, we're registering this block. Okay. And what is that block? Well, that's all inside the build folder. Okay. So that's all there. But now these are the compressed assets. So we don't want to look at those. We want to look at our source folder. So when you run a Gutenberg package script, so when we run one of these scripts here that says build, that script builds this into its build folder. So it takes things like SCSS and converts it to CSS. It can take our JSX and convert it to JavaScript for being loaded. So this is a basic of React that you need to know. And there's plenty of tutorials on that out there. So, you'll be able to get to grips with that. But let's take a look at the code because that's really what we're here to look at. So first of all, block.json. You'll see here that we've got all these basic things like the schema and the name of the product and that I'm using the smiley face and all those sorts of things in my description. Next up, we've got the attributes, and that's what's really important here for understanding things. So we've got our taxonomy, which is the type of a string, and the default is just category. So if you install this block and put it on a default website, by default, it's just going to give you a list of categories inside the blog posts. All right. So any categories that are there, that's what it's going to show. Okay. Next up, we've got the depth value, which I just showed you, which is a number of 0. Title li, which says categories. Now that's the top of the list. So when I put that in as categories, the first list item says categories, and then the rest of the list is added. If I have that empty, there is no item. So on my particular one here, there's none, one isn't there, and that's because my title li here is empty. Okay, so that's all of that. Show count, that's just a boolean, so that's my switch on and off. Okay, so that's this switch. Show post count, show title description, etc. These ones here are all these different boolean values. They can either be true or false, and by default they're all false. Keywords, that's just a little hangover from some code where I copied and pasted some things. You don't have to worry about that. And then we've got our text domain, which is the name that I've given everything for languages, and then we're loading our editor script, our editor style, the style, and the render.php, which we're going to take a look at. Okay, so we've got our block.json there, everything's there. Now let's take a look at the Edit.js, our index.js, and the other files. So index.js is really just a very simple boilerplate bit of code, and all it's doing is saying the Edit.js file here is imported as edit, and then all my metadata get it from block.json. So everything for metadata comes from here, and this edit file has to be loaded. Inside here, we're loading our default language settings, and then we import inspector controls and the use block props. Inspector controls is what's used in the sidebar. So over here, in the sidebar, these are all inspector controls. They're all wrapped inside what we call the inspector control. So then inside of that, we have a couple of different controls that we want. We've got a text control, a panel body, a panel row, a toggle control, and a select control. Okay, so there's just those controls, and they're all from WordPress components. So let's go over, take a look at that for a second. So each one of these is a row inside a body panel, right? And that's all stored within there. So that's kind of the way it works. If you think about the way that HTML is structured, they're all tags, things are all inside containers. That's the way that that works. Next up, we load our editor.css, and this is where we have any kind of CSS that we want to load that is for the editor part of the interface. Sometimes you want to load something slightly different in the editor than what you have on the front end. So that loads that. Next up, we load two elements out of React. One is called fragment, and the other is called useState. Now, fragment, I use it. You don't have to use it, all right? You could just go straight into the inspector. I use it. It seems to make my code run reasonably well. Somebody who knows a lot more about React will be able to tell you more about that, but it seems to work quite well for me. And useState is about understanding the state of the select dropdown, okay? So that you can manage the state of the up and down in that. So then we go into our default edit function, and we've got attributes and set attributes passed in there. And then first of all, I set a constant called taxonomies, and this goes to the WP data select and looks at core to get the taxonomies. So this is using the API within WordPress to say, get me all the taxonomies that we have registered on this website. Next up, we convert that over because I don't want to get the whole taxonomies item and just shove it in my select box. It doesn't work that way. Select boxes have labels and values. So what we have here is the taxonomy name, the taxonomy slug that's in the label, and then in the value, I just want the taxonomy slug, okay? Next up, we've got our constants for our attributes, and these here all directly relate to what we have in our block.json. So if in block.json, I've got taxonomy. In here, I have taxonomy, okay? So you can see them all the way down there. Those values is what we just showed you. Then we've got our fragment, we've got our inspector controls, we've got the panel body. So this is a sidebar body element, and you can see here, this is the category list settings. When I go over here, category list settings. So that's this here, right? That's that panel. Then I've got a panel row with a field set, and that's my select controller for the taxonomy. This here is the select controller. Its value is taxonomy, which is passed in from here, from my block.json. So we know what that is. Its options come from taxonomy options, which we set further up here when we queried out everything out of the API and put it all into a nice little list. And then on change, so when this select control changes, we want to change the attribute inside taxonomy to the value that we have. So here you'll see we've got value and label. So we're not putting the label in there, we're putting the value in there. And that's the slug of each taxonomy. We've got the next has no margin at the bottom. That's just a little shortcode just to stop any padding around that select controller. Next up, I've got the depth of list. Well, that's the depth value. And you can see that's all just there. Title li, same thing, another text controller with an on change event. And then we've got a toggle controller. And these toggle controllers are for showing the post count, showing the descriptions, etc. And when we look at that, so we've got our drop down, our two text fields, and then our toggle controllers all the way down here, okay? And that's everything. So you've got 4 toggles, 2 text fields, and 1 select drop down. And that's all listed very simply inside here. And these are all these rows. And then at the end, we finish our inspector controllers, and then we say on the output, what do I want to put an output to the page? All right, so this is the use block props, and this is the WP list category block. Now you could use a dynamic kind of tool here to be able to show what's actually coming back from the block. I didn't, I just left it like that. If you guys want me to show you how to fix that up, I can do another video, we'll do another version, leave a comment below. But that's what that is. So this bit here with the use block props, that's what we're seeing over here in the actual page where all the control is. Okay, so that's what that is. So that's everything. So that's my full editing interface all ready to go. Now, when I edit, this points at this file here called render.php, and render.php picks everything up. Okay, so that's all set within block.json. So as we come down to block.json, that's a tongue twister. When we come down to block.json, we can see here at render that I've got this render.php file, and that's looking at this file right here. So the render.php file, it receives data automatically because we've got a dynamic block. Okay, and it automatically receives that data from the Edit.js when it's saved and when it's rendered on the page. Okay, so that's what we're seeing there. Now, here, what do we have? Well, we get the block wrapper attributes, which is just really the name of the block, and we put it through this WP KSES stuff, which is just really checking the data. Whenever you do that echo like that, it's just saying make sure we don't have anything harmful coming out in our HTML. It helps stop, malicious code and things like that being hijacked in those attributes. Next up, we run this here, the WP list categories right there. And what you'll notice is WP list categories, it doesn't seem to reference anything within my render file. Why is that? Well, it's because this is directly linking into this core WordPress developer element called WP list categories. And the interesting thing is this takes an arguments array, and that's why I've named everything exactly the same as what they are here. So because I've named everything exactly the same way, I can pass my attributes that I got from React directly into this function, and they all get outputted, except for one attribute, which is called show debug, which is just down here. And this here does a do action that outputs my attributes into Query Monitor. And this just means that as I'm building things out in React, I can turn that debugger on if I want to and see all the values that my plugin is sending to my dynamic controller. Because sometimes with React and things like that, it can become a little bit more tricky to debug things. So particularly on your front end, you might want to say, well, hey, what attributes were stored inside Gutenberg to be sent to my plugin? Well, that will tell you because the show debug is on. So that show debug, when we look inside our code, so when we go to the block.json here, show debug is right there. So I've set it up there inside block.json, and then inside the editor, we have it as a constant here as part of the attributes, show debug. So because it's in attributes there, all these values show up in attributes inside render.php. So that attributes right there is exactly the same value and should be the same value as attributes right here. So attributes, taxonomy, depth, title, etc. will all be there. This means that if you wanted to add one of the other values, so let's say, for example, you come in here and you say, you know what, I want to add the separator. So I could copy separator from there. I could go here and just say separator. Oops. Up there, I could just go and edit that and go right there and say separator. And then that value is inside my attributes. But what value would it be? Well, in that case, I might decide to go, hey, because this is text, I'll take my title li field, copy, paste that just like that. Let's tidy that up just so it looks a little bit better. And then I would say, separator here. And then I'd paste in paste in this separator value. There, and there, and I've missed the S off, of course, because I'm doing this kind of live. So let's go ahead and do that. And then I can commit that change, and all of a sudden the separator value is now available for me. Now, the other thing that I would have to do, because I'm not going to directly edit this on JIT, I can show some of these extra values later if you guys want them in some other videos. But this here would also need to be added into block.json. So I'd add another field here, the same as title li, as a string with a default as to whatever it is. So here, the default is a BR or a break in HTML. So the separator is a separator between links. So by default, it's a break, but you could add something else if you chose to. Style is another one. You could say list, or you could default to something else. And then by looking at this particular function, you can find out what else you can do. So you can do order by, separator, show count, show option all, show option none, there's all these different things inside of here. So there's a separator right there. I could change that to something else. If I wanted to change, have something with order and have ascending or descending, I could add another select box and change that so I could change my ordering if I chose to. So there's lots of really cool things you can do here. within this function. But, you know, this is just some free code where we're going to go through and show you about dynamic blocks. So all of this here is very easy to use as far as I can tell. But of course, I've been coding for a while. So, you know, if you guys need more help with something or have particular questions, let me know. I would recommend, if you want to get into creating dynamic blocks, go ahead, add this to a site, go and add a custom taxonomy, add a custom post type, put some data inside it. You can use something like Faker to do that. And then from there, go ahead and try and add an extra field. Make sure that you go through adding the extra field and then maybe add that drop down with the ascending and descending, because then that will give you a bit more understanding about how those different fields work and how you can pass attributes into that attribute render page. And that's why I've turned this particular thing here, this debugger, on. So if I go over here and I'll just put debug on there and we'll do a quick update. And then right now you can see that my log here is empty. So that logs there is empty, but I've turned that on. So now I'll do a quick refresh. And now I've got my logs here. See how there's a 1 there now? So that output in the logs, and here's the data that got passed over. So you can see here, taxonomy, title, li, etc. That's the PHP data that's being passed into that. And it's all just being thrown into that closure. So it's a really great way to be able to see that. And again, all this is set up as just really a learning exercise for anybody who wants to learn about it. But at the same time, it was a cool little thing that I needed for an end client. You know, before that, I was trying to deal with some facets and things like that. And I realized, hey, this client doesn't really need that. Just having these particular clickable elements is enough. We've made all these different category pages. This is going to work fine. So that's really the overview of all the code. Like I said, I'll leave some links below so you can check this out. Hope it helps you. And yeah, that's it for today. Well, I hope you like that dive into the code. You know, sometimes I just show people how something works real quick, but this time I wanted to dig a bit more into the code about how I actually put this together, just to help people in the WordPress community. If you want more videos like this, where I go into the code, why don't you leave a comment below and let me know the kinds of things that you'd like to learn about for WordPress. And if you did enjoy the video, of course, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, like, and subscribe to the channel if you like content like this. I produce stuff like this regularly. All right, well, I'll see you in the next video.